Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody, and welcome to today's TP Talks webinar, Human Consequence of Automation. I'm joined today by Brian Cantor, Principal Analyst and CCW Digital Director for Customer Management Practice. I'm your moderator, Amit Shankadas, Executive Vice President, Global Market Engagement with Teleperformance. In my role, I help our clients traverse this digital landscape we'll be talking about, and I'll facilitate today's conversation with Brian. Before we get started, a few housekeeping items. There are several related resources available for you to download in the Resources widget to the right of your screen. Please take advantage of that. This webinar is designed to be interactive. You'll see multiple icons at the bottom of your console. If you have any questions, please submit your questions in the Q&A window to the left of your screen. Do this anytime during the conversation. We'll be addressing questions and answers towards the end of the webinar. For technical issues, please click on the Help widget. It's the box that looks like a question mark. So what is TP Talks? TP Talks is a series of 30-minute webinars designed to help you as curators of your customer experiences at your companies to help you learn from best practices, trends, innovations, and real-world success stories from people just like yourselves. Teleperformance has worked diligently with our clients and industry analysts to curate this content for you. There's several of these available on demand. Once again, you can access these from the resource widget to the right of your screen. A little bit about Teleperformance, your host for today. Teleperformance serves as a strategic partner to the world's largest companies by providing digitally integrated business services. It offers a one-office support service model combining customer experience management, back-office services, and business process knowledge services. These end-to-end digital solutions guarantee successful customer interaction and optimized business processes, anchored in a unique, comprehensive, high-tech, high-touch approach. Teleperformance's 330,000 employees based in 80 countries support billions of interactions every year in a shared commitment to be simpler, faster, and better. We're particularly proud of the recognition we get from industry bodies such as the Great Place to Work and in various leadership quadrants published by analysts. The recognition by many of our clients for the ability to help curate their customer experience make a palpable difference to their brand is a manifestation of our mission. With that quick introduction, I'd like to now introduce you to our guest speaker, the man of the hour, Brian Cantor. Brian is the Principal Analyst for the Customer Management Practice. In his role, he leads all customer experience, contact center, technology, and employee engagement research initiatives. Using his proprietary research, he also authors CMP's industry-leading market studies and special reports. Additionally, he serves as the Managing Editor and Director for CCW Digital, which, by the way, is the largest web publication and community for customer experience professionals. With that, Brian, welcome, and let's get right into the conversation. Brian, we know automation will impact sorry, go ahead, Brian.
I was going to say it's an absolute pleasure to be here. I love that man of the hour description. I don't know if I've earned it yet. Hopefully the content will warrant that description by the end of the discussion, but I will say I love what TP does with this format, really diving right into the content, getting around the rhetoric, the nonsense, and diving right into the practical instruction. It's such a great learning format. It's such an honor to be here, and I can't wait to share our insights while also answering as many audience questions as I possibly can.
Excellent. Thank you, Brian. Okay, so Brian, some people say automation will replace humans. Others say it'll augment them. In your experience, how will automation impact contact center employees?
Well, the reality is that it's both, right? And I think that's the main takeaway. What I want to have here is the idea that we have to start being honest and transparent about the real consequences of automation, because 95% of companies right now believe there will be a meaningful impact on their workforce. They understand that AI is going to change the way we think about our contact center agents, change their functions within the business. And so depending on some of the tasks that they're working on right now, we've all talked about will be eliminated, and that may mean that agents will have to change their positioning within the business, focus on new things, learn new skills, and adapt to new situations. And starting to prepare for that is really important. We can't just throw around buzzwords like let's augment performance or let's make our agents better capable at serving customers. We have to really dive into the how. What changes do we need to make? Now, the good news right now is that organizations are starting to understand that companies are really thinking about the way that they're starting to think about the ways that their agents are affected by technology. They're making agent effort a top priority when they're actually buying technology. Essentially 4/5 of companies right now say that when they are looking at new systems, their goal is how do we make life easier for agents? The problem here is that it's not necessarily working. Right now, only 20% say that they're actually using technology to prove agent productivity, and that number falls to 10% for automation. So what that tells you here, to kind of summarize what's on this slide, is we have a scenario where we know automation is meant to make agents better. It's also meant to allow them to focus on more meaningful work. We're starting to buy technology with those goals in mind, but we're not yet seeing the results. And so today's discussion and what I'm going to be sharing today, and I know that you have some case studies to back it up as well, is how do we get rid of this negative stat? How do we go from we want to make an impact for our agents and we want it to be a positive impact, and to actually going from wanting it to achieving it? That's the real goal of today's discussion.
Yeah, so Brian, like with anything, I think there's always a step process, and I know you have, I believe, a 4-step process.
Yes, and we want to go, again, like I said, moving from rhetoric to reality, we're going to look at these 4 areas. So one is, first of all, identifying the opportunity, then identifying what will happen in the short term, so that initial impact on your workforce. Then you want to look at the actual AI-human relationship and how you can evolve that. And then finally, a long-term roadmap. And frankly, I would say that a lot of organizations are still stuck on the first one, but I would say most organizations are definitely not getting to those latter 2 phases, and that's really where you're going to see the impact. That's really where you're going to see the value. If there's one thing I want to everyone to take away here, it's that if you don't consider those last 2, you're not putting yourself in position to make the most of your automation investments.
That's fair enough, Brian, and why don't we address this in sequence? So let's take the first one, identifying the opportunity. In your experience, what tasks should companies look to automate?
Yeah, and I'm just going to move the slide up for a second. So right now, you want to look at 3 types of things. One is what right now requires your most effort. So where are employees spending the lion's share of their time? We have stats showing that only about 1/3 of organizations feel that their agents are spending most of their days on meaningful work, which means that in the average organization, most agents are actually spending their time on work that takes a lot of their effort and probably isn't that important. And right there, that's a telltale sign that you have an automation use case. Now, you don't just want to focus on the boring stuff, though, the rote tasks. I think that's a mistake a lot of people make. What you want to look to are the ones that don't require heavy emotional input, and in fact, may be worse if humans are focusing on them. If you look at certain types of data entry or form building or even some kinds of analysis, there's situations where humans are likely to make mistakes and therefore lead you to the wrong outcome. And so in all of these scenarios, whether it's to make life easier for your agents or to make back office processes better and more efficient and more accurate, those are the kinds of things you want to look at when you're focusing on automation. And that's, I see on the slide right there, I have some notes that you want to remember. The big mistake I often see is, let's just automate the boring stuff. Let's just take these meaningful tasks off our agents' plates. Don't think about it that way. Think about where you can add value. What tasks right now would be better served by having automation handling those? Where can technology work better than humans? Because when you start to think about it that way, then guess what's going to happen? Your agents are going to be in position to do what they do best. The other thing you want to look at here do you have misalignment between your systems, your data, your different departments? You can't successfully automate data entry or form building or call logging or any number of different engagement tasks if your tools don't talk to each other, if they have disparate records, if they conflict with each other, if your organization is not aligned. So before you can even automate those back office, seemingly rote tasks, you need to make sure that your organization is aligned from a system standpoint, from a strategy standpoint, because without that alignment, your automation impact is not going to go as far as it possibly can. Now, Ahmed, I know you have some insights from TP that you wanted to share to really back up this point.
Yeah, and Brian, I think one of the areas where you talk about, the boring work versus some of the more critical and important, compliance is a huge issue for many companies nowadays. And compliance, I think, is a great area where one can look to automate. By the way, it also does take away some boring stuff too, but it's a value add that automation can bring. However, I think I'm going to go through a slightly different case study here. So this is a case study on a large healthcare company and how they use a series of RPA bots in eliminating the mechanics of the call and letting the advocates focus more on member interactions. In this case, their objective was to help their advocates focus on demonstrating empathy, working with the members, solving their problems, regardless of the metrics associated. One of the challenges they faced is they had to work with many different mechanics on figuring how the systems work. There were multiple systems, multiple sources in trying to resolve an issue for a member. The solution we built was a series of bots. These bots were designed to help the advocates arrive at a resolution quickly. It's a high-tech, high-touch approach, what Brian alluded to earlier too, with technologies assisting the agents in a value-added manner. Let me give you a glimpse into exactly how this works. This first bot that you're looking at is designed to help the advocates remove the mechanics of copying and pasting information from applications and helping the advocates relate back with members. Again, something that sounds fairly trivial, but oftentimes results in missed data. The second set of bots is designed to perform quick checks between multiple systems. And you can imagine an advocate having all these multiple systems that they're toggling between. In this case, it's about the member calling back to check for eligibility, the discrepancies between the different systems. The advocate is served up that information by the bot, and more importantly, it provides them guidance on the next step. And that's the value add that Brian was alluding to. The third bot, the agent helps the agent create tickets for the back-end system. And this is where some of those discrepancies, particularly errors, can creep in with the wrong copy and paste, the wrong information being pushed into the back office. The bots ensure 100% accuracy. Right? Now, this allows the agent, the advocate, to be able to focus their time and energy on the empathy equation, which is a very human emotion and not one that automation can substitute. One example. Brian, let's move ahead. You had mentioned the second step in identifying the initial impact. So if we automate these tasks, what happens to the workflow?
Yes, and this right here is another area that often gets overlooked. I think we all fantasize about those scenarios in which we can get some of these high-effort, low-value tasks off our agents' plates, where we can start to do things that technology works really well, that we forget about that next step, which is, well, what's going to actually happen to our agents? So with three things I want to put in your mind right now that you need to be focusing on. First of all, if you were to take some of these tasks off your agents' plates, how much more free time will they have? How much more focus will they be able to devote to your work? Just knowing how many hours you're going to be saving is going to really help you better plan your resources, better understand your staffing capabilities, and just know what kind of impact automation can even make for your business. Then the next step you want to look at is what high-value tasks are most important for your agents to spend their time. So if you know, as an example, you've now saved 2 hours of every agent's day by automating some of the back office stuff, where would you spend those 2 hours? So would they be answering certain kinds of calls? Would they be doing some sort of analysis? Determining where those 2 hours will go is really important. And again, a strategic thing that often gets overlooked. People just assume that suddenly we've automated all the boring work or agents are going to be more productive, but they haven't really planned for that productivity. They're not putting agents where they need to be, so they're not capitalizing on that opportunity. The last part here is starting to rethink the scheduling and metrics to account for new agent workflow. So again, suppose you take the most obvious cliche example, that is now because the back office stuff is being automated and because you're using bots for simple tasks, your agents are going to focus on complex interactions. If they now have more time to focus on these personal, unique, complicated calls, shouldn't you rethink the way you measure those calls? Maybe you're going to start to look for more customer satisfaction, higher accuracy and quality, longer calls to really resolve issues. Whatever it may be, the point is you want to know how their shift in workflow is going to change the way you measure performance. Now, there's a few things to remember here. First and foremost, we're talking about complex calls, right? We're taking for granted that agents are ready for that. You all know in your call centers that's not necessarily the case. We've trained so many agents to handle very simple matters and get people off the phones very quickly that they're not necessarily ready to have these in-depth conversations. And so you really want to make sure that they're getting comfortable not only with the workflow, but with the skills they need to perform there. Additionally, and this is an easy one, but it's an easy one to overlook as well, making sure that you have the right resources and staff in place. If you are going to start to, as an example, because now you have all this extra time, create a customer retention unit where you have agents who are devoted to retaining customers, you first of all physically need to make sure that you have the agents who are there to do it, and then you have to make sure that you have the right skilled agents in place. You can create all this extra opportunity, but if you don't have the right people or enough people, you're not going to be able to take advantage. And finally, I talked about the changes in metrics, right? Well, just because you as a contact center person get why quality should go up or why you should shift from focusing on average handle time to CSAT or Net Promoter doesn't mean everyone in your business gets it. Your CEO, your IT department, other stakeholders, they may be very set in the old ways of thinking about performance. And so if you're going to start to talk about changing metrics and scheduling and workflow, you really need to make sure that your entire army of stakeholders understands what that's going to mean and is ready to adapt. Now, that leads into another area. So that's sort of the impact on workflow. It's creating opportunities for human agents to be more available. The next step is going to be on what it takes to actually maximize these relationships. Going to that point where you hear a lot of people throw around, let's augment performance, or let's even make humans better at what they do. Well, here is the ultimate test case for automation. Are you using your technology to make that happen? Now, the first thing you want to look at are let's say you have your agents on high value work. Which aspects of those high value calls tend to require a lot of effort? As an example, you're now having customers deal with very complex travel bookings you're having your agents deal with complex travel bookings for corporate clients. There's a lot of data you have to look into. There's staffing restrictions. There's all this information that really impacts those bookings. Looking that up in the existing knowledge base may be very tricky. They may have to look at 30 different screens. They may have to consult different guidelines for how to book for this company. This is all stuff that distracts from the agent's ability to connect with this client. And so you want to identify those, because once you start to really emphasize augmentation, you need to get rid of these problematic tasks. You also want to look at the aspects of high-value work that have the biggest impact. So is there a certain aspect of the experience, be it maybe you can proactively guess why the customer is calling, maybe you can use their name, maybe you could reference some personal qualities, whatever it is for your business, understanding in these more in-depth interactions what really moves the satisfaction needle, what makes that customer happy, and then how can you use your tools and data to put that in the agent's hand? Can you streamline a screen pop that will give them what they need from the knowledge base? Can you give them all the personal details about this customer so that they're also able to perform? Now, the one point I really want you to remember here is that this it's very easy to start to look at these benefits and get excited. How much would your customer support agents love a more streamlined desktop that pops knowledge base entries for them automatically? That would be awesome. They would appreciate it, and you should pursue that. But why stop there? Why just focus on the transactional support aspects of what you're doing when you can really start to look at future value and ways to even expand beyond what you're doing right now? There are a lot of service and sales opportunities that come from having more data at your fingertips, that come from having better trained, more capable, more focused agents. So understanding how you can use your automation tools to also allow agents to do more than they ever could, that's going to be very valuable there. And then, of course, you just want to look at the quality of your data. There's no sense in giving people an advanced screen pop or predictive insights or sentiment analysis if you have out-of-date records or you don't have a 360-degree view of your customers. So in order to use augmentation tools, you have to make sure you have the right data and records to look up.
Great, thanks, Brian. And to your point about being able to supplement an agent's ability through tools and technologies as it particularly relates to sales, which is a hugely important piece for us and for all companies, by the way. And I think sales is one thing that we know there's a huge emotional and human connection to. I thought I'd go through a case study of this, if you don't mind. In this case, this is an airline that offered its private label credit card to customers that called in to the airline, whether it was for a flight change or cancellation, baggage inquiry, or complaint for that matter. At the end of the call, the service agent made the offer for its private label credit card and then transferred to another desk for conversion and close. In the past, the service representative used their own discretion as to when to make the offer. It was a hit and miss, right? There wasn't any tracking of the offer, whether it was made, the disposition. Not every agent made the offer, and in many cases, the offer shouldn't have probably been made when it was made. There's no real qualification. As a result, you can well imagine there was low transfer and subsequently low application conversion. Through the use of automation tracking, offer rate performance, subsequent interaction analytics, and then artificial intelligence, they were better able to understand when to make an offer and when not to, using caller ID, caller profiles, previous interactions, what people were calling for, etc. This information was served up to the service rep, who then enables them to make the right offer at the right time. It also was served up to their coaches who were able to coach them better. But this wasn't just about appropriate targeting. It also, by the way, made the service rep feel more successful and fulfilled. And this is kind of that, I think, a really great example of the balance between the human consequence of automation, when we can make the individuals who are key to this transaction feel more empowered, feel more successful, and therefore, by the way, pass that on to their customers, right? Obviously, a happier agent makes for a happier customer. Interestingly, by the way, not only did transfers and conversions go up, but interestingly, offer rates went up by about 8% as service reps got more comfortable and successful in making the offer. Okay, before I go on, one quick note to everybody. If you have questions, please feel free to submit them in the Q&A button at the bottom. We've got a few that have come through, but we're getting to a point where we will start taking questions in a few. So, Brian, I think you said the last part was one of the most important pieces of this. It's building a roadmap. So let's talk about the long-term impact on our workforce.
Yep, it's one of the four most important topics we've had today. Just kidding there, but the reality is, so building a roadmap is so important because this is what I think a lot of people, when they get caught up in the buzzwords, they don't consider. One of the things that I alluded to earlier, and I want to really emphasize here, if automation works, your workforce needs will change. If you're literally starting to, as an example, use bots for most of your simple transactional issues, then you're simply not going to have as many issues that require live agents. It's just a reality that there's far more simple tasks than complex ones. So if you have a lot of back office tasks that you're suddenly changing and handling with automation, you're not going to need as many back office employees. There's just not as much work for them to do. We can beat around the bush and we can say that, there's no change in our workflow, and that's just not the case. The reality is your needs within these departments may change. Now, there's also an upside to this too, is that suddenly now you're able to achieve things you never thought you previously could, things that you didn't have the resources for, you didn't have the manpower for, you didn't have the staff in place for, are now within reach. You can start to achieve new tasks. I gave a very simple example earlier about maybe adding a customer retention function. You now have the capability because you have new people there. You also can strengthen your analysis arm. You can start to invest in a higher caliber of care. There's a lot of different things you can do with your organization. So it doesn't mean you have to fire agents. It doesn't mean you have to shrink your total workforce. It just means you have to be honest that you may need fewer frontline agents and people handling those basic tasks. Now, you're also going to want to think about, in addition to the impact on your headcount, who's going to support the AI and automation technology? You need people, whether it's interfacing with your technology partners to learning from and programming bots based on interactions you have or new compliance requirements. You need a team in place that's going to oversee all that. And so you need to really have these long and hard questions about how your workforce needs are going to change in order to make sure you have staff positioned correctly. One of the biggest things we also hear is that, we're just going to move people throughout the business. And that's absolutely a great idea, and it's one that will prevent you from having to fire people while also making sure that you are adding value to your company. But not everyone's ready to be moved to other parts of the business. So if you want to, as an example, transition someone from call center agent to bot builder, well, they need to know how to build bots. They need to understand that aspect of your customer experience. And so there is a lot of preparation you need to make the most of that staffing component. Ultimately, you want to create a hypothetical scenario. If everything we wanted to automate worked and suddenly, everything we did was successful, what would happen next? And that's really, really important to go through. And one other thing I want to remind before we jump into the questions is that this isn't just you here. I know a lot of you work with BPOs, you work with partners. Make sure they're using automation correctly as well. Because if they don't have this all mapped out, they're not going to be as efficient as a partner as they possibly can be, which is going to cost you as well. So make sure that everyone involved with your entire customer experience journey is as passionate about using automation correctly and has this long-term vision in place. And when they do that, you're going to be successful.
And you're spot on, Brian, because the way we've seen this with our clients, and I think you alluded to this earlier too, is some people will look at these as projects. And projects are good because they potentially return a short-term ROI. But really, where we've seen it successful is when the myriad of clients we work with, we have created a roadmap. And it's we call it the ABC of digital transformation, looking at the agent experience, the B being the business optimization, and the C, the customer experience, and balancing out that journey. And I'd add another layer to this, and this is your point about whether it's retraining, retooling the workforce to meet the needs for the future. Okay, with that, let's jump right into questions, Brian. We've received a few during the registration process and as they're coming through here. For those that we can't get to, we will respond to you separately here. So the first question, in order to achieve automation within an organization, a new internal cultural approach is required. What are the key cultural pillars in order to maximize the opportunities which automation can bring?
So earlier I referenced in response to this question, it's a great one by the way, I referenced transparency. I think knowing here's what we want to achieve with automation, here's what that can mean for your organization, that right off the bat is a really important cultural tenet here. One other thing I would recommend that's really crucial is emphasizing the voice of the agent. If you go back to some of my earlier slides, I referenced really diving deep into what's frustrating agents, what's getting in the way of their success, where are they spending time that could be better spent elsewhere. No one knows the answers to those questions better than your agents. And unfortunately, I feel like so many organizations don't do enough to cultivate agent feedback, don't have that open door system where people can share their insights and recommendations and ideas. And so you're not getting that voice of the agent and therefore can't use automation successfully. So I would say the top of the organization needs to be very transparent about what you're trying to achieve and what's going to happen. And the lower parts of the organization from a hierarchical perspective need to be comfortable sharing their ideas, sharing their feedback, and letting you know that what they're sharing, you're going to take action on. You're going to use technology to make it easier for them.
Great, thanks, Brian. And here's one that you kind of alluded to a little bit earlier, but a more specific question. What are some of the major ways that you've seen organizations work to mitigate and potentially negate social effects of automation?
I think the biggest thing here is being honest, because what happens is we have a lot of people out there saying, oh, there's gonna be no impact on jobs, we're just gonna augment everyone, and then when suddenly you do have to start to slash the workforce because you haven't prepared, that's when they're going to be upset. So be honest that yes, some of your jobs will change, we may need you elsewhere, and so it's really important to start to retrain skills and get prepared for that reality. That transparency and honesty is going to do a lot to emphasize a better relationship with those out there. You also want to look within the community and start to, if anything, start to invest in new types of work. Look toward local universities, look toward your community. Hey, maybe you weren't a good fit for our traditional call center agent situation, or maybe you didn't want to work in a call center, but now we need people to train our bots. We need people to analyze data, and we're going to be an employer who emphasizes those skills. When you're proactive about what those needs are going to be, and you A, make your current agents very aware of how their roles may change, and B, start to source local talent that meets those expectations, you're going to be able to really excel in this environment. You're going to show that you care about employees and you care about results, and as long as everything is level-headed and driven by a roadmap, you can achieve employee happiness and achieve those results at the same time.
Brian, I think we have time for one last question very quickly. Should bots be bots or should bots be human?
The reason this comes up, it's an interesting question. The simple answer is bots should be bots. And the reason why I think that this is even a question is because oftentimes what happens is that people are trying to deploy bots at the wrong parts of the journey. If you're deploying a bot in a scenario where you think a customer wants it to make jokes and banter with them and try to pretend like it's human and its name is Jim and it's all like you don't even want to admit that it's a bot, it probably means you're deploying that bot in a scenario that should be handled by a human agent in the first place. Bots work best when they do things that are meant for quick, convenient, accurate, detail-driven, and convenient interactions. You think about a scenario like, again, if you were trying to change your pizza toppings on an order that you made, a bot's a great use case for that, because instead of trying to yell and ask you what you want or have a conversation, it gets right down to business. Here's what you ordered. Input your change, confirm your change, and you're good to go. And if your bot looks like that, it's going to be what the customer wants, even though it isn't necessarily acting like a human person. So this is only a debate. I think if you're ignoring slides 1 and 2, which were identify where bots should fit, identify what you should automate, not just because your agents don't want to do it, not just because the technology might be able to handle it, but because it makes sense to automate and because you're going to create value as a result of that automation. When value is your guiding light, when the voice of the customer is your driving force, when agent empowerment is your ultimate goal, that's when automation works, that's when your company thrives, and that's when you stop debating bot or bot, human or human, you just say, we are delivering the best possible contact center.
Well, Brian, clearly a bot could not have delivered this, and I misspoke earlier. You weren't the man of the hour, the man of the half hour, because these TP talks are 30 minutes long. Brian, thank you so much for your insight and your input today. Very much appreciated. As a reminder for everybody on this webinar, you can download our resources, watch other webinars on demand. They're available in the resource window to the right of your screen. Once again, thank you very much Brian for your participation. Thank you everybody for joining, and see you on a future TP Talks. Bye-bye.